Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to pick up our GraphQL lesson. So this repository inside of your resource folder contains a repo that I have made for you, which is branched off roughly from lesson 25, which is where we had just finished setting up everything for Netlify. The reason why we branched off from here is because there are a couple differences and nuances of GraphQL that we want to implement that directly correspond to what we do later. So GraphQL is actually a replacement for Redux. It's very rare that you will utilize both GraphQL and Redux. The reason being that GraphQL has its own way of keeping track of the data, and typically speaking, GraphQL data querying kind of runs in conflict with Redux. Now we'll discuss that more once we get to the actual implementation section. But inside of this repo, I want you to copy the repo, and then I want you to go to your actual application, and I want you to clone it down into a new folder. Make sure that you're not in your previous Crown Clothing folder. So you can just clone that down, and then just make sure you go into your new folder once you've finished it. Now, once you're inside of your repo, what I want you to do is I want you to yarn add in two packages. The first is at Apollo/client. Apollo is going to be a front-end client that allows us to make requests for GraphQL, as well as receive responses for GraphQL. And it comes with a bunch of bindings for React so that we can actually get GraphQL data and make GraphQL requests within our components. That's the first thing. The next thing I want you to add is the GraphQL library itself. So with these two different libraries, we are now going to be able to actually utilize it inside of our application. While all of this is installing, I want to talk about GraphQL and the syntax. So to do this, what we're going to do is go back to our web browser, and I want you to go into your resources folder and look for this GraphQL playground link. This will take you to crown-clothing.com, where I have made this website for you, which is known as a GraphQL playground. A GraphQL playground is a place where you can make queries in the GraphQL language directly against the database or the GraphQL server that's connected to the database. GraphQL sits between the database and the server, and what it does is it allows you to format your requests in the manner that we discussed in the previous video, where we pass it some object that looks roughly like the data you want. Now let me show you what is inside of this playground. Over on this side here is where you will enter in the information that tells GraphQL what you want. So here you'll see write your query or mutation on line 1. A query is a request for data. A mutation is a request to modify or add data. That's mainly the two different things that you can do inside of GraphQL. It's all queries where you request data, and it's all mutations where you ask to update or create or delete data. So you can see these kind of like your REST API in a way. Down here is where you include any additional variables, which we'll discuss when we start talking about doing queries and mutations. Over here is where you will get a response. When you hit this play button, once you have a correct query or mutation, the data will show up here. This is also going to tell you if you have an incorrect query or mutation. Any response back is all going to happen here. There are also two additional tabs here. The first one I want to talk about is the schema. The schema represents everything that you can make inside of GraphQL. So we have queries, and queries define the different types of requests you can ask for. Remember, we have to tell GraphQL what we want. And the name of what you are asking for is actually defined by the person who wrote the server. So these queries I created. You'll see that I made 3 different queries for you. There is collections, where you get back an array of collections. Now, what is a collection? A collection you can see down here as the type. This is very similar to what we wrote in TypeScript. Collection actually replaces category, as you know, inside of our main application. The category, of course, represents the collection of clothing, and inside of a category, there were category items. Here instead, I have called it a collection, and in a collection, there are items. So if you look at this definition signature of the type, you'll see that we have ID. So the ID is any identifier, but in GraphQL, there is capitalized ID to signify that this is specifically meant to be unique. It's in the format of a string, but it's also unique. That's why it is ID in caps. You'll also notice that there is this exclamation mark. The exclamation mark signifies that this field is mandatory. This is not an optional field. Without it, then it's optional. There is a title, which points to string. And the string similarly is also not optional. It is mandatory. Next, you will see items. Items points to an item type, meaning that this is going to hold a collection of items or an array of items. The array is designated by the square brackets, and inside will state what that type inside the array will be. So of course they are items, also necessary, and the array also necessary. So that's another thing. Coming down here, you will see the type of item. And here you will see again, identifier must be unique, hence the capital ID. Name of string, price of float. Float is a number. The only thing is that it can be decimal placed, which is why you will see float, also necessary. Image URL, which is a string, and then collection, a collection. And the reason why there is this is so that GraphQL can connect an item so that it belongs to a specific collection. It's really just the way that GraphQL sets up on the back end. Primarily, you will not usually be querying for this collection, but you can if you wanted to. If you were fetching an item and you wanted to know the collection it was in, you could also reference the collection. So this, again, defines for you what the types will be. And then as for the queries, we'll talk about that in the next video where we'll actually start querying GraphQL for some data. But for now, I just want you to know that if at any point you wanted to look at what your data that you can ask for looks like, because again, we're asking for very specific parts of the data, always open up the schema to see what you have. Okay, let's jump into the next video where we will start working with the queries. I'll see you in the next video.